The first trailer for the next X-Men movie, Dark Phoenix, is here, so let's break down all the mutant goodies that we found. Although the movie is set in the 90s, this scene takes place in the past, probably the 70s, as we see a young Jean Grey asking James McAvoy's Professor Xavier if he can fix her. The professor replies that she's not broken, but let's see how that works out for him. Notably, the X-Mansion is not in disrepair like it was in Days of Future Past, which was also set in the 70s, but Xavier still has his long hair, so this must take place after that film. This version of Jean Grey was reintroduced in X-Men Apocalypse, which was set in the 80s, and depicted Jean as a teenager whose burgeoning Phoenix powers were awakened in the final act. We also know from X-Men The Last Stand that the original film trilogy's version of Jean came to Xavier at a young age, though apparently under different circumstances than we see here. A cover of The Doors' The End plays on the soundtrack, which could be interpreted in a number of ways. Is this foreshadowing Jean's end? The end of this incarnation of the X-Men? Or even the entire series of X movies as we know them, now that the characters are reportedly going to come under the control of Disney soon? The now adult Jean, once again played by Game of Thrones' Sophie Turner, is obviously undergoing some kind of change, and not a good one if Hank McCoy's reaction is any indication. Based on Xavier and Mystique's dialogue here, it could be that the film will stick to some version of the concept originated in The Last Stand, where Xavier, for lack of a better term, installed psychic circuit breakers in Jean's mind when she was young in order to keep her dark Phoenix persona and powers at bay. Obviously, this meddling is once again coming back to haunt Xavier and to endanger everyone else. Back to the young Jean of the 70s. It appears that her telekinesis causes a horrific crash that perhaps kills what looks like her parents. Even in this moment, Jean is able to use her powers to keep the shattered glass away from her. Or maybe, instead of psychic trickery, this time Xavier simply lied to Jean about what really happened to her parents. Jennifer Lawrence, back as Mystique, basically calls the now bald Xavier out for being a liar. The McAvoy version of the character always had hair until the end of the previous film, X-Men Apocalypse. Note the all-new X-Men costume design here, which with its black and yellow design harkens back to the classic look of the comics, as well as the new X-Men run by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely. Is this island where Michael Fassbender's Magneto is currently based? The trailer seems to imply that, but it could also be Muir Island, which was Moira McTaggart's base for mutant research in the Marvel Comics. Yes, X-Men First Class introduced Rose Byrne as a McTaggart who was a CIA agent, but that doesn't mean she hasn't moved to the island at this point. Magneto is apparently hiding out once again, attempting to live the simple life. Oh, poor Magneto. Jean is looking for his help and for answers, so does that mean he was present in the 70s when Xavier first took Jean in? Don't forget, de-aged versions of Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart as the characters were working together to recruit Jean in The Last Stand. And while Dark Phoenix takes place in the splintered timeline from that movie, there will always be similarities between the two realities. Here's our first look at Jessica Chastain's villain. Rumors had pegged her character's name as Smith and also say she's a shapeshifter, possibly a gender-swapped version of Mastermind, whose powers of mind control and illusion played a role in Jean's descent in the original Dark Phoenix saga of the comics. The film's writer-director Simon Kinberg tells IGN that Smith was just a pseudonym used during the shoot, and this mysterious character is not from Earth. I will say that Jessica's character is not Mastermind, but there are elements of the way Mastermind manipulates Jean that Jessica's character does employ, the filmmaker said. Jessica's character has elements of a few different characters from the comics. Interesting. But who is Chastain meeting with? Is that Magneto? The next few moments appear to be clever editing to suggest that's Jean she's approached in church, but it's clearly not. But here the character does seem to be talking to Jean and tempting her to come to the dark side with talk about feeling like she doesn't belong here. Feeling like you don't belong. That's a very X-Men theme. Sophie Turner told IGN that, quote, basically Jessica's character is very interested in this power that I've kind of acquired and this cosmic force that I have, and she wants that force to use it for her own, and she nurtures me in a way to make me kind of trust her. All our returning X-Men are also present. Ty Sheridan's Cyclops, who will hopefully have more to do than Cyclops usually does in these movies. Will he be forced to sacrifice Jean in the end? Evan Peters is also back as Quicksilver. Here he's seen helping along the younger students. He's come a long way since being the outsider in Days of Future Past. And there's Alexandra Shipp as Storm, sans Mohawk this time out. Nicholas Holt's Beast is apparently the official guy who looks upset in this trailer. Hey, was he the guy meeting with Chastain in that church earlier? Perhaps his discomfort with whatever Xavier did in the past will lead him to betray the team? Jean is changing, we're told, and she sought out Magneto looking for, as he puts it, permission. Here, she is making a stand against her former teammates. We spy Quicksilver, Nightcrawler, Beast, Professor X, Cyclops, Storm, and Mystique. Yeah, 3 of the X-Men are blue. And they're all wearing that same black and yellow costume, aside from Xavier, of course. Interestingly, the costumes only glimpsed at the very end of Apocalypse are nowhere to be seen in this trailer. Well, it is supposed to be 10 years later, after all. Inevitably, it's Phoenix versus her teammates, and also versus the cops. This showdown might be the same area where Chastain popped up earlier, or maybe it's Jean's childhood neighborhood. Is this clever editing, or are these paramilitary troops storming the X-Mansion? More likely, this is the X-Mansion intercut with the soldiers attacking Magneto's home, a distraught and increasingly traumatized Jean. As in the comics and The Last Stand, it looks like this version of the Phoenix story will have the good Jean fighting back against the bad Jean. And that's more like it! Finally, the X-Men are in space. We'd heard that Dark Phoenix would take the mutants to a more cosmic place than the movies had ever gone. Kinberg told us that, quote, "It is a cosmic story in a way that is extraterrestrial, which is something we've never done in the X-Men movies before. But it's obviously something that is integral to the Dark Phoenix story. So I felt we couldn't do what we did on X3 and ignore that. We had to actually embrace it." He also said that a fair amount of the film takes place in space, and the inciting incident that starts to turn Jean dark and fill her with this uncontrollable power of the Phoenix happens in space. Also, the director said there are forces from space that come to Earth because of that inciting incident. Presumably, this is a reference to Chastain's character, who he would not confirm or deny is part of the alien Shi'ar Empire from the comics. The Shi'ar were a big part of the Dark Phoenix story. Is this Jean blowing up her childhood home? Either way, with all the X-Men in black formal attire as if they're going to a funeral, it seems possible that Jean killed one of her teammates. Based on these shots, neither Mystique, Magneto, nor Quicksilver are accounted for, so it could be any one of them. And more space action, as a massive blast also overtakes Xavier while he's back in Cerebro on Earth. That, my friends, is what we call Phoenix Fire. As Magneto retrieves his helmet, he's telling off Xavier. And here is Beast and two other mysterious figures seemingly allied against the X-Men. Beast's loyalties will definitely be tested in this film. And yes, Nightcrawler is still around. He's teleporting Xavier and the others in this shot, presumably to confront Magneto and his allies based on the clothing they're wearing. And here's what could be a big clue regarding who, if anyone, dies. Beast is resting his head against Mystique, which gives us the feeling that she's the one who dies. Don't forget, the two had a romantic connection way back in First Class, and while the films that followed didn't do a great job at following up on that thread, it would make sense that Mystique's death would lead the Beast to abandon Xavier for Magneto. In this shot, Magneto means business. If Jean killed Raven, then that would pit Eric and Charles against each other in the battle to save or kill Jean. And the trailer closes out with the Phoenix Force in full effect and Jean Grey possessed with those creepy Dark Phoenix eyes. That's everything we found in the Dark Phoenix trailer. For even more trailer analysis, check out our breakdowns of the Captain Marvel and Red Dead Redemption 2 gameplay trailers.